"She doesn't belong here," the flight attendant whispered under her breath. But the man in the tailored charcoal suit didn't even look up when he said, "She stays." The soft hum of the private jet wrapped around Olivia Hayes like a mistake she couldn't undo, the kind that starts with one wrong step and ends with your entire life shifting direction. She stood frozen in the aisle, clutching her worn canvas bag, her eyes darting from the polished leather seats to the flight attendant now waiting for her to move, to apologize, to disappear, because people like Olivia didn't end up in places like this. Not by accident, and definitely not by invitation, and yet, here she was, heart pounding so loud it drowned out the low engine rumble as she glanced down at the boarding pass crumpled in her hand. Seat 3A, and then back at the man already sitting there, broad shoulders relaxed, one hand resting lazily on the armrest, as if the world adjusted itself around him, not the other way around. And for a split second she considered backing out, muttering something about a mistake, pretending she had never stepped foot into this world of quiet luxury and effortless control. But before she could speak, before she could even breathe properly, his voice cut through the moment again. Calm, firm, unquestionable. "Close the door," he said to the attendant, not even glancing at her. And something about that tone, steady, absolute, made the tension shift, because the attendant hesitated, clearly unsure, clearly aware that Olivia didn't belong, and yet she nodded, stepping back, sealing the cabin with a soft click that sounded louder than it should have, like a line being drawn that Olivia had just crossed without permission. Slowly, almost mechanically, Olivia slid into the seat, her movements stiff, careful, like she might break something just by existing here, her fingers tightening around the strap of her bag as she avoided looking at him. But she could feel his presence, not overwhelming, not aggressive, just certain, like he had already decided something about her that she didn't understand yet, and that made her chest tighten even more. She swallowed, finally forcing out a quiet, shaky, "I think I'm in the wrong seat." The words barely above a whisper, but he heard them. Of course he did, because men like him always heard everything that mattered. And for the first time, he turned his head, his gaze landing on her with a sharpness that made her breath catch. Not cold, not warm, just intensely focused, like he was studying a detail no one else had noticed. And then, just as quickly, his expression softened into something unreadable, almost amused. "No," he said simply, his voice low, controlled. "You're exactly where you're supposed to be." And Olivia blinked, confused, her mind scrambling to catch up with a reality that didn't make sense, because nothing about this made sense. Not the jet, not the silence, not the way everyone seemed to follow his unspoken rules, and definitely not the way he had just decided, without explanation, that she belonged here, when her entire life had taught her the opposite. When every secondhand dress, every late rent notice, every job that barely paid enough had told her she was always just outside the door, never inside it. The engines roared louder as the plane began to move, and Olivia's heart sank with the realization that it was too late to step off now, too late to fix whatever mistake she had made. And as she sat there, hands trembling slightly in her lap, she couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't just a wrong seat. It was the beginning of something she wasn't prepared for, something that had already been decided the moment he looked at her and said she stays. The moment the seatbelt sign chimed on, Olivia realized she had made a mistake she could not quietly undo, the kind that follows you long after the moment has passed. She sat stiffly, her back barely touching the soft leather, her hands folded too neatly in her lap, as if good posture alone could justify her presence. But nothing about her belonged here, not the scuffed edges of her shoes, not the faded stitching on her sleeve, and definitely not the way her eyes kept drifting toward the exit as if she could still escape midair. And beside her, Ethan Blake seemed untouched by any of it, flipping through a document on his tablet with calm precision, the faint glow reflecting off his sharp jawline as though this silence, this control, this world was simply his default setting. After a long moment, Olivia finally spoke again, her voice quieter now, careful. "I really think someone is going to come looking for this seat." And this time he did glance at her, just briefly, like he was measuring something invisible. "They will not," he said, as if that alone settled it, as if his word reshaped reality itself, and something about that both steadied her and unsettled her even more. because people did not talk like that unless they were used to being obeyed. The plane lifted smoothly into the sky, pressing her gently into the seat, and Olivia closed her eyes for a second, trying to gather herself, trying to remind herself who she was before this moment. A girl who counted every dollar, who checked price tags twice, who had been on her way to a job interview that could finally change things, and now she was here, miles above the ground, sitting next to a man who had decided she belonged without even asking her name. She exhaled slowly, opening her eyes, and when she did, she caught him watching her again, not intrusively, not intensely, just enough to make her aware that she was not invisible anymore, and that alone made her pulse quicken. "Why did you say that?" she asked, the question slipping out before she could stop it. "Say what?" he replied, his tone neutral, but his attention now fully on her. "That I belong here," she said, swallowing. "You do not even know me." There was a pause, not long, but deliberate, as if he was choosing whether to answer honestly or not at all, and then he leaned back slightly, his expression softening just enough to shift the air between them. "I know enough," he said, and that answer should have frustrated her. It should have made her push back, but instead it left her with a strange, quiet curiosity, like there was something about her he had seen that she herself had missed. A flight attendant approached with a tray, offering drinks in crystal glasses that looked too perfect to touch, and Olivia hesitated, glancing at Ethan without meaning to, unsure of what was expected of her. And he noticed. Of course he did, giving a small nod, barely there, but enough to anchor her. "Water is fine," she said quickly, her voice steadier now, and as she took the glass, her fingers brushed the cool surface, grounding her in something real, something simple, and yet nothing about this felt simple anymore. Minutes passed in a silence that was not uncomfortable, just unfamiliar, and Olivia found herself studying the details she had never paid attention to before, the quiet efficiency of the staff, the subtle luxury of everything around her, the way Ethan existed in it without effort, like gravity bent differently in his world. And then her gaze dropped to her bag, the worn canvas creased from years of use, the zipper slightly uneven, and without thinking, she reached inside, her fingers brushing against the edge of her sketchbook, the one thing she had carried through every setback, every move, every almost opportunity, and she pulled it out halfway before stopping, suddenly, aware of how out of place it might seem here. But before she could slide it back, Ethan's voice came again, softer this time, almost curious. "What is that?" And she hesitated, then answered, "Just something I do." And for the first time since she had sat down, his expression shifted into something genuine, something that was not control or certainty, but interest, real and unfiltered. "Show me," he said, not as a command this time, but as an invitation, and Olivia felt it then, the subtle shift from being placed in a seat she did not belong to being seen in a way she was not used to, and somehow, that was even more dangerous. Olivia hesitated, her fingers still resting on the edge of the sketchbook as if it carried more weight than paper and ink, as if showing it would reveal something she was not ready to explain, because this was the one part of her life that had never quite fit anywhere, not in job interviews, not in conversations about stability, not in the practical world she had been trying so hard to survive in. Slowly, she pulled it out, the worn cover soft from use, the corners slightly bent, and for a moment she just held it in her lap, unsure why his attention on. Something so personal made her feel exposed in a way she could not define, and Ethan did not rush her. He did not fill the silence. He simply waited, his gaze steady but not demanding, and that patience, that quiet expectation, made it harder to retreat. Finally, she opened it, flipping past the first few pages too quickly, instinctively hiding the older sketches that felt too raw, too unfinished, until she landed on something safer, a series of pencil drawings of city streets, small moments, captured in lines and shadows, people walking, sitting, existing in ways most others would overlook, and she angled the book slightly toward him without fully letting go, as if she might still pull it back at any second. He leaned closer, just enough to see, his expression sharpening with focus, and for a brief second, Olivia braced herself for the polite nod she had grown used to, the kind people gave when they did not really understand but wanted to be kind, but it did not come. Instead there was a pause, longer than expected, followed by a quiet, almost thoughtful, "You notice things," and she blinked, caught off guard, because that was not what people usually said. They said it was nice, or interesting, or asked if she had studied art. But this was different. This felt like he had actually seen what she was trying to do, and she let out a small breath she did not realize she had been holding. "I just draw what I see," she replied, her voice softer now, less defensive, and he shook his head slightly, not dismissing, but correcting. "No, you draw what others miss." And the way he said it, simple and certain, made something shift inside her, something quiet but undeniable. She looked down at the page again, suddenly aware of it in a new way, as if it had been translated for her, and before she could respond, he reached forward, not touching the sketchbook, but pointing lightly to a detail in the corner. A small figure sitting alone on a bench she had almost forgotten she had drawn. "That one," he said. "You spent more time on that than anything else," and she felt a flicker of surprise, because he was right. She had, without even realizing it at the time, and she glanced at him, searching his expression for some hint of how he had noticed. But there was nothing performative there, nothing calculated, just a quiet observation that felt strangely personal. "I guess I did," she admitted, and for the first time since she had stepped onto the plane, her shoulders relaxed just slightly, the tension easing in a way she did not expect, and yet at the same time, a new kind of awareness settled in. Because this man, this stranger who had decided she belonged in a place she never should have been, was now seeing parts of her that most people overlooked entirely, and that realization was both grounding and unsettling all at once. The plane continued its steady climb. The world outside reduced to clouds and distance, and inside, something subtle was shifting, not loud, not dramatic, but real, as if the mistake that had brought her here was slowly turning into something else entirely, something she could not yet name. And as she closed the sketchbook gently, her fingers lingering on the cover, she realized that for the first time in a long time, she was not thinking about where she did not belong. She was wondering why he believed she did. The quiet between them lingered, but it no longer felt uncertain. It felt intentional, like something unspoken had been acknowledged without needing to be explained. And Olivia found herself holding on to that feeling longer than she expected, her fingers resting lightly on the closed sketchbook as if it had just been given new meaning. Outside the window, the clouds stretched endlessly beneath them, soft and distant, a world removed from everything she knew. And for a moment, she let herself sink into the stillness, into the strange calm of being somewhere she had never imagined she would be, until Ethan's voice broke it again, low and steady. "Where were you headed?" And the question, simple as it was, pulled her back to reality, to the version of her life that had existed just an hour ago, and she hesitated before answering. "A job interview," she said, glancing down at her hands. "Well, I was." And he studied her for a second, not pressing, just waiting, and she let out a small breath, almost a quiet laugh. At herself. "I am probably missing it right now." And that truth landed heavier than she expected, because until now, the situation had felt like a pause, like something temporary, but hearing it out loud made it real. She had stepped off her path without knowing if she could find it again. Ethan did not react the way she thought he might. There was no immediate apology, no offer to fix it, just a measured pause. And then, "What kind of job?" he asked, and she shrugged slightly, trying to make it sound smaller than it felt. "Assistant position at a design firm. Nothing special." But even as she said it, she knew that was not entirely true. It had been important to her, a chance to step into something more stable, something closer to the life she had been trying to build, and he seemed to understand that without her needing to explain, his gaze sharpening just slightly. "You wanted it," he said, not as a question, and she nodded, her voice quieter now. "Yeah, I did." Another pause followed, but this one felt different, like something was shifting again, and then he said, almost casually, "There will be other interviews." And she looked at him, a flicker of frustration rising despite herself, because it was easy for him to say that, easy for someone who clearly lived in a world of endless options. "Not always," she replied, a little more firmly than before. "Sometimes there is just one chance, and if you miss it, that is it." And for the first time, something in his expression changed, not defensiveness, not dismissal, but recognition, like he was hearing something he had not considered. And he held her gaze for a moment longer before looking away, thoughtful now in a way that softened the space between them. The plane leveled out, the steady hum settling into the background, and Olivia shifted slightly in her seat, the earlier tension replaced by something more complicated, something she could not quite name, because this was no longer just about being in the wrong place. It was about what that wrong place was beginning to reveal, about the way this man, who seemed to control everything around him, was listening to her in a way that felt unexpectedly real. A few minutes passed before he spoke again, quieter this time. "What would you have done if you got it?" And the question caught her off guard, not because it was difficult, but because no one had asked her that before, not really, and she thought about it for a second, about the version of her life she had imagined, the small apartment with better light, the steady paycheck, the ability to buy new sketchbooks without hesitation. And she answered honestly, "I would have stayed," she said. "Worked, saved, tried to build something, maybe eventually do my art full time." And when she looked back at him, there was something different in his eyes now, not just interest, but understanding, like he had placed her somewhere in his mind that made sense. And that realization sent a quiet ripple through her, because she was starting to see it too, that maybe this moment, this mistake, was not pulling her away from something, but towards something she had not yet imagined. The conversation should have ended there. It should have settled into silence like everything else that did not belong in her world, but it did not, because Ethan did not look away this time. He kept his attention on her, as if the answer she had given mattered more than anything else on that plane, and Olivia felt it, the weight of being seen again, not for what she lacked, not for what she could not afford, but for what she wanted. And that made something inside her steady in a way she was not used to. She shifted slightly, her fingers brushing against the edge of her sketchbook again, grounding herself as she met his gaze. "It is not a big plan," she added, almost apologetically, as if minimizing it would protect her from disappointment. But he shook his head, not dismissing her this time, but correcting her in that same quiet, certain way. "It is yours," he said, and the simplicity of it caught her off guard, because no one had ever framed it like that before, not as something small or unrealistic, but as something that belonged to her, something valid simply because she wanted it. The plane moved smoothly through the sky, the light shifting slightly as they passed through a thin layer of clouds, and Olivia found herself watching the reflection in the window, not of the world outside, but of herself sitting there, in a place she should not have been, next to a man she did not understand, and yet somehow she did not feel as out of place as she had at the beginning, and that realization was both comforting and unsettling at the same time. A few minutes passed before she spoke again, more cautiously now. "Why are you going where this plane is going?" And the question lingered in the air between them. Not confrontational, just curious. And for the first time, there was a pause in him, a subtle shift that told her he was deciding how much to reveal, how much to keep behind whatever walls he had built. And then he answered, "Work," his tone neutral, but there was something behind it, something she could not quite read, and she tilted her head slightly, unconvinced. That sounds like a very simple answer for something that clearly is not simple. And for a brief second, the corner of his mouth lifted, not quite a smile, but close enough to change the atmosphere. "It is not simple," he admitted, "but it does not need to be complicated either." And that only made her more curious, because everything about him suggested layers she had not yet seen, a life far removed from hers in ways she could not even begin to understand. The flight attendant returned, placing a small tray of food between them, arranged with the kind of precision that made it look untouched even before anyone reached for it. And Olivia hesitated again, unsure of what was expected, but this time she did not look to Ethan for permission. She simply reached for it, choosing to act as if she belonged, even if she was still learning how that felt. And he noticed, of course he did, but he said nothing, only watching quietly, as if that small decision confirmed something he had already believed about her. As she took a bite, she realized she had not eaten since early that morning, the taste grounding her further in the moment, and she exhaled slowly, her shoulders relaxing just a little more. And in that quiet shift, something else changed too, something unspoken but real, because she was no longer just reacting to him. She was starting to meet him halfway, starting to exist in this space without constantly apologizing for it. After a while, she glanced at him again, studying him more openly now, noticing the way everything around him seemed to align, the subtle authority in the way the staff moved, the effortless control in the way he carried himself, and she asked, more directly this time, "Who are you, really?" And the question landed differently than the others, heavier, more intentional, and for a moment, he did not answer, his gaze shifting slightly as if considering the weight of the truth, and then he looked back at her, his expression calm but deliberate. "Someone who noticed you when no one else did," he said, and it was not the answer she expected, not even close. But somehow it felt more revealing than a name or a title ever could have been, and as she sat there, absorbing that, Olivia realized that whatever this was, whatever had started with a wrong seat and a single decision, it was no longer just about being in the wrong place at the wrong time. It was about why he had chosen her to stay. The answer lingered in Olivia's mind longer than she expected, not because it explained anything clearly, but because it shifted something deeper, something she had spent years quietly accepting about herself. The idea that she moved through the world unnoticed, that she blended into the background while louder, more polished people took center stage. And now here was someone who had not only noticed her, but had acted on it without hesitation, without asking permission, and that realization made her sit a little straighter, her grip on the moment tightening as if she did not want to lose it. She looked at him again, more carefully this time, studying the way he held himself, the quiet authority in his posture, the way every movement felt deliberate. And the more she looked, the more the pieces started to align, the staff's deference, the seamless control, the absence of uncertainty in anything he said. And a thought began to form, slow but undeniable, and before she could stop herself, she asked, her voice steady but quieter now, "You are not just traveling for work, are you?" And he did not answer immediately, which in itself felt like an answer, his gaze shifting briefly toward the window before returning to her. And there was a subtle change in his expression, not guarded exactly, but measured, as if the truth was something he rarely needed to explain. The plane began its gradual descent, the engines adjusting with a soft shift in tone, and the city below started to come into view through the window, sprawling and unfamiliar, a reminder that whatever this moment was, it had a destination, and that destination was coming closer with every passing second. Olivia felt it then, the quiet urgency building beneath everything else, because this could not last forever. This strange, suspended space where she had been placed into his world without explanation, and she found herself asking the question she had been holding back since the beginning. What happens when we land? And the words hung there, simple but heavy, because they carried everything she had not said, everything she did not understand, and everything she was afraid to assume. Ethan watched her for a moment, really watched her, and for the first time, there was something almost personal in the way his gaze softened, like he understood exactly what she was asking beyond the words. And when he finally spoke, his voice was calm, steady, but with a clarity that left no room for misunderstanding. "You will not be leaving alone," he said, and her breath caught slightly. At that, not because of what he said, but because of how certain he sounded, as if the decision had already been made somewhere she could not see. And she searched his face for something more, for an explanation, a reason, anything that made sense of it. But all she found was that same quiet conviction that had followed him from the moment she sat down. The plane lowered further, the ground rising to meet them, and Olivia felt her pulse quicken, not from fear exactly, but from the realization that whatever this was, it was about to become real in a way she could not ignore. And yet, instead of pulling away, instead of insisting on stepping back into the life she had known, she found herself staying, her body still, her thoughts racing, caught between the safety of what she understood and the pull of something entirely unknown. She glanced down at her sketchbook again, her fingers brushing over the worn cover, and then back at him. And in that moment, she realized something that both steadied her and unsettled her at the same time. She did not know where this was going. She did not know what he wanted, and she did not know why he had chosen her. But for the first time, she was not entirely sure. She wanted to walk away before finding out. The wheels touched down with a smooth, controlled glide, and the moment the plane connected with the ground, Olivia felt it, the quiet shift from something suspended to something real, something that could no longer be paused or questioned from a distance. Her fingers tightened slightly around the edge of her seat as the aircraft slowed, the soft hum of the engines lowering into a steady rhythm, and beside her, Ethan remained exactly the same, composed, unaffected, as if landings like this were just another part of his routine, not a turning point, not a moment that changed anything. But for her, everything felt different now, heavier, more defined. As the plane came to a complete stop, the cabin door opened almost immediately, the staff moving with quiet precision. And through the opening, Olivia caught a glimpse of what waited outside, a line of black vehicles, drivers standing ready, and a few sharply dressed individuals positioned with a kind of alertness that made her chest tighten, because this was not just travel, this was something organized, something prepared, something that revolved around him. She turned slightly toward Ethan, her voice low, almost cautious. "This is your work?" And he stood smoothly, adjusting his jacket with a small, practiced motion before looking down at her. "Part of it," he replied, offering nothing more, and that answer only deepened the realization forming in her mind, that whatever he did, it was not ordinary. It was not something that fit into simple explanations or casual conversations. Olivia hesitated for a fraction of a second before standing as well, her movements slower, more deliberate, as if stepping into this next moment required a decision she had not fully made yet. And as she followed him toward the exit, she became acutely aware of every detail. The way the staff greeted him with quiet respect, the way no one questioned his presence, the way everything seemed to align around him without effort, and when they stepped onto the ground, the air cooler and sharper than inside the cabin. It hit her all at once. This was his world, fully, undeniably, and she was standing in the middle of it without any clear reason why. A man approached immediately, holding a tablet, his posture straight, his tone professional but deferential. "Mr. Blake, everything is ready." And the name landed like a quiet echo in Olivia's mind. Blake. It fit too easily with everything she had already begun to suspect, and she looked at Ethan, searching his expression for confirmation, for context, for anything that would anchor her understanding, but he only gave a slight nod to the man before turning his attention back to her, as if she mattered just as much in this moment as whatever had been prepared for him. "You should not be here," she said suddenly, the words slipping out before she could filter them, not as an accusation, but as a realization, because nothing about this matched the version of him she had been trying to piece together, and his gaze held hers steadily, not defensive, not dismissive, just calm. "And yet you are," he replied, and that answer, simple as it was, shifted the weight of the moment back onto her, because it was true. She was here. She had stepped into this without being forced, without being stopped, and now she had to decide what that meant. The driver opened the door of one of the cars, waiting, and Olivia stood there for a second longer, her heart beating faster than she wanted to admit, her mind racing through every logical reason to step back, to thank him and walk away before this became something she could not control. But then she thought about the missed interview, the life she had been trying to build piece by piece, the way it had always felt just out of reach, and then she thought about the way he had looked at her sketchbook, the way he had seen something no one else had, and without fully understanding why, she took a step forward. Ethan watched her closely, not urging, not insisting, just waiting, and when she reached the car, he spoke again, quieter this time, but no less certain. "This is where you decide," he said, and Olivia paused with her hand on the door, the weight of that choice settling in, because she knew, deep down, that stepping into that car was not just about following him for the day. It was about stepping into something unknown, something that could change everything. And for the first time, she realized she was not just afraid of the risk, she was afraid of what might happen if she said no. Olivia did not move right away, her hand resting on the cool metal of the car door as if it could anchor her to a decision she was not fully ready to make. And for a moment the world around her seemed to quiet, the distant hum of engines, the faint movement of people, all fading beneath the steady rhythm of her own thoughts, because this was no longer about confusion or coincidence. This was a choice, clear and undeniable. She glanced over her shoulder at Ethan, who had not stepped closer, who had not reached for her or tried to guide her, He simply stood there, watching, waiting, his expression calm but present, like he understood exactly how much this moment mattered, and that restraint, that absence of pressure, made the decision feel even heavier. "If I get in," she said slowly, her voice steady but softer than before, "I am not just following you for the day, am I?" And he held her gaze without hesitation. "No," he answered, and that single word carried more weight than anything else he had said, because it confirmed what she already felt, that this was something bigger, something that would not simply end when the day did. Olivia looked down for a brief second, her fingers tightening slightly on the edge of the door, and then she opened it, the movement small but decisive, and as she stepped inside, she felt it, the shift, the quiet crossing from uncertainty into action. From wondering what might happen to allowing it to happen, the interior of the car was just as controlled, just as refined as everything else around him. Soft leather, muted tones, a space designed for comfort without excess. And she slid into the seat, her bag resting carefully beside her, her sketchbook still inside, as if it was the one constant she could carry with her no matter where this led. Ethan followed a moment later, taking his place beside her with the same composed ease, and as the door closed, sealing them inside, the outside world faded once again, replaced by a quiet, contained space where everything felt more focused, more immediate. The car began to move smoothly, merging into the line of vehicles, and Olivia watched through the window as the airport receded behind them, replaced by a city she did not recognize, tall buildings stretching into the sky, streets lined with movement and purpose, and she felt it again, that mixture of anticipation and uncertainty, the sense that she was stepping into something carefully constructed, something she had not been meant to see. After a few minutes, she turned to him, no longer avoiding the questions that had been building since the beginning. "You still have not told me what this is," she said, her tone calm but direct. And he looked at her, not surprised by the question, almost as if he had been expecting it. "It is a decision point," he replied, and she frowned slightly. "For you?" she asked, and he shook his head once. "For both of us." And that answer lingered between them, because it shifted everything again. It meant this was not just about him bringing her into his world. It was about something that involved her in a way she did not yet understand. She studied him carefully, searching for any sign of doubt or uncertainty, but there was none, only that same quiet confidence that had followed him from the moment she sat down in the wrong seat. And she exhaled slowly, leaning back into the seat as she processed it, because every step so far had led her deeper into this unknown, and yet she had not turned back. The car slowed as they approached a large building, glass and steel reflecting the late afternoon light, the entrance lined with people moving with purpose, and as they came to a stop, Olivia felt her pulse quicken again, not from fear, but from the realization that whatever this was, it was about to reveal itself, and she glanced at him one more time before the door opened, her voice quieter now, but steady. "Then I guess I am already part of it." And he met her gaze with that same calm certainty. "You have been from the moment you sat down," he said, and as she stepped out of the car, the weight of those words followed her, because she knew now that this was never just a coincidence. It was something that had been set in motion the second he decided she belonged. The moment Olivia stepped out of the car, the energy shifted in a way she could feel without anyone saying a word. Conversations softened, movements adjusted, and subtle glances followed Ethan as he walked beside her. Not loudly, not dramatically, but with a quiet awareness that made it clear he was not just another man entering the building. And Olivia felt it instantly. The confirmation of everything she had been piecing together since the plane, the way the world around him responded, the way space seemed to open for him without being asked. They moved through the glass doors into a vast lobby filled with polished floors and natural light, the kind of place designed to impress without trying too hard. And as they crossed the space, a woman in a tailored suit approached, her expression professional but respectful. "Mr. Blake, the board is ready," she said, her tone precise, and Olivia felt it then. The final piece falling into place, because this was not just business, this was leadership, authority at a level she had never encountered, and she slowed slightly, her steps faltering just enough to make her question whether she should still be here, whether this was where her place ended. Ethan noticed immediately, Of course he did, his attention shifting to her with that same calm steadiness. And without hesitation, he extended his hand slightly toward her, not pulling, not insisting, just offering. "You are coming with me," he said, and the words were simple, but they carried the same quiet certainty that had followed her from the moment she sat down, and Olivia hesitated, her eyes flickering from him to the hallway ahead, where people were already waiting, where decisions were being made that felt far beyond anything she understood, and for a second, doubt surfaced again, sharp and clear. "I do not belong in a boardroom," she said, her voice lower now, more honest than before, because this was not a matter of confidence. It was reality, her reality. Ethan held her gaze, not dismissing her concern, not brushing it aside, but meeting it directly. "You belong where you choose to stand," he replied, and something in that answer shifted the weight of her hesitation, because it placed the decision back in her hands, not as something he was controlling, but as something she was allowed to claim. She looked at his hand again, then at the hallway, then back at him, and slowly, deliberately, she placed her hand in his, the contact brief but grounding, and together they walked forward. The boardroom doors opened with a quiet push, revealing a long table lined with executives, screens glowing with data, voices pausing as they entered, and for a split second, Olivia felt every eye in the room turn toward her, measuring, questioning, trying to understand who she was and why she was there, and her instinct was to step back, to fade, to become invisible again, but she did not. She stayed, her shoulders straightening as she remembered his words, as she remembered the way he had seen her before anyone else did. Ethan released her hand as they stepped fully into the room, taking his place at the head of the table with effortless authority, and the shift was immediate, the room aligning around him, attention focusing, expectations settling, and Olivia stood just beside him, not hidden, not pushed aside, but present, and for the first time, she saw it clearly, not just who he was, but what this moment meant, because he had not brought her here to observe. He had brought her here to stand in a space she would have never stepped into on her own. He glanced at her briefly, just enough for her to catch it, and then he addressed the room, his voice steady, controlled. "Before we begin, there is something you need to understand," he said, and the room stilled even further, attention sharpening. "The future of this company will not be built by people who only see what is obvious." And as he spoke, Olivia felt it, the connection between his words and everything that had happened, the plane, the sketchbook, the way he had noticed what others overlooked. And then he turned slightly toward her, not fully, but enough to make it clear. "It will be built by those who notice what others miss." And the silence that followed was not confusion, it was recognition. And Olivia realized in that moment that this was the real reveal, not just of who he was, but of why she was here, because this was never about a wrong seat. It was about a right perspective, and as she stood there, no longer questioning her place, she understood something she had never allowed herself to believe before. She did not need to be invited into a different world to belong there. She just needed to see it differently, and maybe, just maybe, she had been in the right place all along.